Sup, you beautiful bastards? Hope you're having a fantastic Monday. Welcome back to the Philip DeFranco Show, and let's just jump into it. And the first thing I want to talk about today is Donald Trump getting stabbed. That is the most clickbaity way to get into the story we're talking about, but it's one that I saw everywhere. But the reason we saw those headlines is Shakespeare in the Park in New York City are currently doing a version of Julius Caesar where Julius Caesar is actually Donald Trump. And if you are familiar whatsoever with Julius Caesar, you know that Caesar gets stabbed.
Oh, we should totally just stab Caesar!
And so there was a lot of outrage online when video of this production blew up on the internet showing Trump or a version of Trump being stabbed to death by senators. People like Laura Schaefer saying, "To be honest, I thought it was shocking and distasteful. If this had happened to any other president, even as recently as Barack Obama or George W. Bush, it would have not flown. People would have been horrified. I don't love President Trump, but he's the president. You can't assassinate him on stage." Although the defense I've seen from people is that the character is not specifically named Trump or referred to as Trump, but it is a version of Julius Caesar with what looks like to be a president who has similar features to the president. And since this huge negative reaction, several sponsors have now pulled their funding. Delta Airlines pulled their funding and said, "No matter what your political stance may be, the graphic staging of Julius Caesar at this summer's free Shakespeare in the Park does not reflect Delta Airlines' values. Their artistic and creative direction crossed the line on the standards of good taste. We have notified them of our decision to end our sponsorship as the official airline of the Public Theater effective immediately." Bank of America saying the Public Theater chose to present Julius Caesar in such a way that was intended to provoke and offend. Had this intention been made known to us, we would have decided not to sponsor it. We are withdrawing our funding for this production. And American Express distanced themselves, tweeting, "We would like to clarify our sponsorship of the Public Theater does not fund the production of Shakespeare in the Park, nor do we condone the interpretation of the Julius Caesar play." And even with these statements, many of the brands just received hate from both sides. Some who were supporting this theater production saying, "This is so sad that you're caving into pressure." Or I've seen people that were offended by this theater production saying, "This is an obvious attempt to save face. It has existed in its current form for around 3 weeks. Did you really not know what your money was going to fund?" And I'm fascinated to know what you guys think about this situation. Is it too much or no, it's art? I've seen a lot of people comparing it to the Kathy Griffin beheaded photo, and then also a lot of people arguing that it's not the same. And I will say, I personally see those two things as somewhat different. Kathy Griffin's severed Donald Trump head exists in its own little bubble, whereas the Trump-like character in Julius Caesar still doesn't fully say we should kill a president. A critic by the name of Jesse Green argues that this is actually an anti-assassination message, writing, "Even a cursory reading of the play, the kind that many American teenagers give it in high school, does not advocate assassination. The killing is an unmitigated disaster for Rome, no matter how patriotic the intention." And in fact, if you go back and you read Julius Caesar, it very much shows us a problem we see in our everyday society, and that is people have such a strong feeling that they are right and they are trying to fend off evil that they often become the things they hate and they doom themselves to that. Fear, paranoia, the rush to violence over a conversation and debate. I mean, these things tear people down. They tear the whole society down. But for you, does that still make it okay to show a Trump or a Trump-like person being killed? I'm gonna pass that question off to you. But from that, I wanna share some stuff I love today. And today in Awesome, brought to you by the Sports Shirt. A shirt that says, "Hey, I don't know what the teams are, who's who, how points are scored, but thank you for inviting me to this party. I want to show support for our team and or person because they are superior to all others, but I also don't want to buy a $150 jersey." We have another run of that this week, so if you want to snag one while you can, link to that down below. And most of today in Awesome are trailers and announcements from E3, so just put an asterisk next to those. As we've seen time and time again, the best versions of what is possible are shown, and then a lot of the time you can be underwhelmed. One of the most recent and notable times that happened was, of course, with No Man's Sky. But some of the goodies we've seen: BioWare's new IP, Anthem. You got Wolfenstein 2, The Evil Within 2. Skyrim on the Switch. Also, if you have an amiibo, you can dress up like Link. Doom VR. Fallout 4 VR, and yes, it is a completely new purchase. State of Decay 2. First look at Assassin's Creed Origins. Will it be good because Assassin's Creed took a year off of their release schedule? Metro Exodus. Star Wars Battlefront 2. A Way Out, which is actually one of the more interesting games that EA announced. It's a co-op Prison Break game from the same people that made Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. I'm on board. And actually, this will just go on forever if I list every single trailer. I'll include links to more of them. Of course, there was also the Xbox One X announcement. This Microsoft swing at 4K 60 frame per second gaming for $499. It's coming out November 7th. A big play here is going to be backwards compatibility. Also, a lot of Xbox One games are going to be getting upgrades. Those including Rocket League, Ghost Recon Wildlands, Resident Evil 7. Then in non-E3 Awesome, we got our first trailer for First Kill. We got John Cena deadlifting Jimmy Fallon, and one of my favorite series on YouTube, YouTube in a nutshell talking about automation. And if you want to see the full versions of everything I just shared, the secret link of the day, anything at all, links as always are in the description down below. And then let's talk about the story around Richard Anthony Jones. Richard was convicted of a robbery in Kansas City, Missouri. They said he robbed a Walmart. Now Richard claims he never did it. There was no DNA evidence. There was no physical evidence. In fact, most of this case relied upon one key eyewitness. A witness who admitted being quite high during the incident and only had a small interaction with the robber who he identified as Richard. So then while in prison, Richard reaches out to the Midwestern Innocence Project and says, I didn't do it. I've heard that there's a guy that kind of looks like me. Can you look into this? I promise I am innocent. And it turned out it was true. This is Richard, and this is Ricky, a man who lived just blocks away from the robbed Walmart. And so 2 years after the Innocence Project began investigating, Richard Jones was released from prison. And funny enough, if you can even use the phrase funny here, Ricky is unable to be prosecuted because they're saying an eyewitness account is not enough to convict on. Now here's the piece of information I was waiting to drop on you. You know how I said it took 2 years of investigative work? Richard Jones was convicted for this robbery in 1999. Richard Jones has not been a free man since 1999 because of a single testimony of an eyewitness account from a person who said, I was really high, who only identified Richard Jones 3 months after the robbery and only shown 6 photographs in the lineup, with Jones being the only person who remotely fit the description. And on top of that, Jones had an alibi where he was with several people that day. I mean, people talk about horror stories. This is a horror story. Jones has been in jail since The Matrix came out because he kinda looked like a guy. I mean, people ask all the time, well, if he wasn't really guilty, why'd he plead guilty? Why'd he cop a deal? Because the system doesn't always work. There are people that are scared of ghosts. No, I'm scared of this. And then let's talk about Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, if you do not know, is a U.S. Commonwealth. What that means is Puerto Rico is not technically a U.S. state, but the people that live there are U.S. citizens. They have to follow federal laws, but they're exempt from some federal taxes. They get U.S. military protection, some federal funding, although not as much as a regular state would, but they also can't vote for president and they're not represented in Congress. Well, yesterday, Puerto Rico, by a vote of 97%, voted to become the 51st state in the United States, which is an amazing vote. Almost an unbelievable vote. You only see like dictators win by that kind of percentage. Well, it turns out it's because only 23% of eligible voters voted. And this is coming from a place where voter participation is usually 80% of eligible voters. And it turned out the reason for that is the opposition party said, boycott this vote. If you don't want Puerto Rico to be a state, just don't vote. Boycotting the vote is a vote. And I have to say, that's kind of a genius move. Because only 23% voted, it doesn't look like the majority actually cared. The opposition party gets to count every single person that didn't vote, whether it be because they actually don't want to be a state, voter apathy, they just don't care, or people that do support statehood but feel like their vote was going to be wasted because of the boycott, boom, they get to get counted as well for the opposition party. And because Puerto Rico can't show that a majority of eligible voters voted yes on this, Congress might not have to really do anything. Because that is what comes next. Congress will decide if Puerto Rico can be a state. And so the next step is something called the Tennessee Plan. Puerto Rico will send 2 senators and 5 representatives to DC to demand to be allowed into statehood. And after this, on paper, Puerto Rico should be able to get through Congress. And I say on paper because the official Republican platform on Puerto Rico says, we support the right of United States citizens of Puerto Rico to be admitted to the Union as a fully sovereign state if they freely so determine. We recognize that Congress has the final authority to define the constitutionally valid options for Puerto Rico to achieve a permanent non-territorial status with government by consent and full enfranchisement. As long as Puerto Rico is not a state, however, the will of its people regarding their political status should be ascertained by means of a general right of referendum or specific referenda sponsored by the U.S. Rubio, Cruz, Trump, they all said they were for statehood for Puerto Rico, but ultimately it brings us back to only 23% voted. But there are people arguing, saying, well, the result is the result regardless of who voted. If we had a presidential election and one of the candidates said, don't even boycott, if you don't vote, that's a vote against the other candidate. But ultimately, even if only a minority of the population voted, the winner is the winner. And so that's why some are arguing this should be seen as the will of the people, while others are saying, look at how many people didn't vote. That's the real will of the people. There's also the potential issue that a Republican Congress would not want to essentially add a Democratic state. And finally, there is the issue of money. Puerto Rico is in massive, massive debt. They had to declare a form of bankruptcy a few weeks ago. They had $74 billion in debt. They had $49 billion in pensions they're unable to pay. You have schools being closed because they can't fund them. You have unemployment on the rise and very high. And even many who do have work, just around 50% are under the poverty line. So there's going to be a lot of arguing that the United States shouldn't be taking on this extra debt at this time. And on top of all of that, that, you would have to have the House and the Senate vote for this by 2/3. I don't know if you've checked out Congress recently, but the Democrats and the Republicans not really working together so much. So could it happen? Yes. Will it happen? Probably not. And then let's talk about the anti-Sharia protests that happened over the weekend in the US. The rallies were held in 24 cities on Saturday. They were reportedly organized by a group called Act for America. Act for America describes themselves as the NRA for national security, whereas the Southern Poverty Law Center calls them the largest grassroots anti-Muslim group in America, claiming 280,000 members and over 1,000 chapters. And for those that don't know, Sharia is a legal or philosophical code that's derived from Islamic scripture. The goal of it is to guide the behavior of observant Muslims. And the organizers of March Against Sharia said that Sharia law is a real threat to Western society, saying it oppresses women, there are honor killings, homophobic violence, female genital mutilation, and other abuses. But over the weekend, there were also counter-protests to this initial protest. Many counter-protesters claiming that the March Against Sharia was just a thinly veiled anti-Muslim movement. Now at this point, I'll just be transparent with where I stand on this. I have no problem with Muslims. I believe that there is a lot of fear-mongering around Sharia law, but I, of course, would be 100% against Sharia law being a law of any land. Like when we cover those stories out of the Middle East of a woman being gang raped and all of a sudden she's going to be sentenced to prison because she had sex out of wedlock. That's some ass-backwards real-world implementation of Sharia law, and that should not be taking place. That's wrong, it shouldn't happen, but when you hear those stories, it incites fear. And if you look at a lot of the information coming out of the United States, a vast majority of American Muslims do not support real-world implementation of Sharia law. That would be like if we look to the Old Testament as a word-by-word rule book for how we should actually live our life according to the legal law. Like if you read the Old Testament, there's some stuff that just doesn't work in modern society. But that also ends up being kind of separate from the main point because these protests and counter-protests seem to devolve into what it is. That seemed like right-wingers against left-wingers. Protesters and counter-protesters in Seattle got pepper sprayed, there were a few arrests, and after seeing videos from the events, I just get a little bit sad. It was just people drowning each other out by screaming at one another or literally blaring air horns right in their faces. This video is from the We Are Change YouTube channel where they're around the counter-protesters and there's a man just blaring an air horn right in this guy's face. He tries to move the guy's hand out of his face and he acts like it was an attack.
Nice civil discussion happening here.
Fucking touch me again! You saw you touched me, right? Fucking touch me again!
Yeah, another YouTube reporter, Lauren Southern, looking to try and film everything that was happening, and at one point someone threw something on her. Some were claiming that it was kombucha, but there were also a lot of others claiming that it was pee. Which was really sad about that is it wouldn't even be the first time that happened to Lauren Southern in the past year. I honestly don't know how to end this story, and maybe it's just because I'm currently sick. I'm trying to fight it off. I'm exhausted for that, but I think I'm also just mentally exhausted because it's not even people screaming at each other anymore. One of the goals was to drown out the hate, which was literally just like, we don't want to hear you. I mean, it's just sad, but it almost feels appropriate. It feels like we started today on a story about becoming what you hate, and we are ending it on a story of people becoming what they hate. I think that's where I'm gonna end it. And remember, if you liked this video, you like what I do on this channel, hit that like button. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you don't miss these daily videos. Also, if you did miss the last Philip DeFranco show you wanna catch up, click or tap right there to watch that. If you wanna see the brand new behind the scenes vlog, click or tap right there. But that said, of course, as always, my name's Philip DeFranco. You've just been filled in. I love yo faces, and I'll see you tomorrow.